Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
This may be my last day here in this office, but I will always be boldly and unapologetically Canadian. My only ask is that no matter what the world throws at us, you always be the same.
Well, that is outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who posted that farewell on social media yesterday. And it's been a long goodbye, but today marks the end of an era in Canadian politics. After 10 years as Prime Minister, Trudeau is set to submit his resignation to the Governor-General, and then a new cabinet, headed up by a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, will be sworn in. A federal election could follow soon after amid a trade war and tensions with the U.S. that have scrambled the political map. Joining me now to discuss all of this are three of our top political watchers. Ryan Tumulty is a political reporter with the Toronto Star. Stephanie Levitz is the senior reporter with the Globe and Mail's Ottawa Bureau. And Michel C. Auger is a political columnist at La Presse and a commentator for Radio-Canada. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ryan, let me start with you. The starting pistol will be fired later this morning in terms of Mark Carney's time in office. What does he have to do to really make himself, differentiate himself from the tired Liberal brand?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see a little bit of that today. I think, the stories that we have heard so far, the details that, we've been able to confirm say that he's going to bring in a cabinet with a lot of, not so much too many new faces, but a lot of Trudeau-era cabinet ministers are going to be leaving. We've reported Mark Miller, a longtime friend of Prime Minister Trudeau, is not going to be in this new cabinet. Jean-Yves Duclos, a longtime cabinet minister, a bunch of other names who have sort of been part of the Trudeau experience since the very beginning are all going to be leaving. And then I think he's also going to, Mark Carney's just going to have a different focus than Justin Trudeau ever did. It's clearly all going to be about Donald Trump, but also about the economy more specifically and more broadly, trying to get at, we're hearing about trips to Europe to shore up trade connections. He's already toured a steel mill, those sorts of things. He's really portraying an economic focused message.
Stephanie, what do you think he has to do? He has to do more than say this. Mark Carney saying that I'm not Trudeau. What does he have to do to really convince Canadians that he is an agent of change?
What I'm looking for today, Mark, is a version of Justin Trudeau's famous quip after he formed his first cabinet in 2015, and it was gender balanced, and he was asked by a reporter, why does this matter? And the Prime Minister then said, because it's 2015. And that was this phrase that sort of came to define a lot of the Trudeau era, doing things for a broader sort of progressive social purpose to lift up Canadians, right? That we're talking about childcare, dental care, pharma. These were big things. What is Mark Carney's tagline? What is the brand that he wants to bring forward to Canadians? Because that brand will need to be exceptionally different from Justin Trudeau's brand if he wants Canadians to believe that he is not just, as the Conservatives keep trying to argue, quote unquote, just like Justin.
Michelle, give us the view from Quebec, as you always do. Polls suggest that he's getting traction in Quebec, which is surprising, I think, to some Liberals there. What's working for Carney in Quebec?
The ballot box question in the upcoming election will be, who do you want opposite Donald Trump to defend Canada? And he has the resume, at least, to be able to say, I'm the best candidate for that job. And that's what drives, and I don't think only in Quebec, I think it drives throughout Canada. We are electing someone who will take care of a crisis that is started by the U.S. administration. And that's what Quebecers are looking for with Mr. Carney, and which makes them accept a certain number of things, including his very rusty French and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, tell us about that. His French is comme ci, comme ça. And that always matters. That always matters in every election, and yet this election doesn't seem like every election. So, Michelle, is that going to be a real liability for Mark Carney?
I don't think so, because first of all, his French is rusty. It's not inexistent. He's not learning French. He's relearning French. And he's very transparent in interviews he gives. He says, look, when I was at the Bank of Canada, I insisted that all my meetings were in French. I remember seeing him when I was on the Hill testifying before parliamentary committees, and his French was nearly perfect. Like he says, it's been 17 years since I have not spoken French. I have to get it back. And you can see a progress interview after interview. It's not perfect, obviously, but he can make himself understood. It's not as if there are other leaders who were literally incapable of speaking French. He's not like that, and his French will get better with time.
Stephanie, there's no doubt Mark Carney, great CV in a great suit. I mean that's for sure. We can see this guy. He's impressive on that level. But can he do retail politics, and does that matter in this election?
We don't know if he can do retail politics. One element of retail politics is accountability, right? Being willing to be challenged in public by the media. And we certainly haven't had any of that since he became prime minister. And the media engagements he had throughout the leadership campaign often ended with everybody scrambling for clarification, or him and later having to say, "Oh, I didn't mean what I just said." So that's not a great sign.
Yeah, what does that suggest to you?
It suggests that senior executives are often used to surrounding themselves by people who will agree with what they say. And they don't like being challenged. Can Mr. Carney handle being challenged? Can he handle it by the press? Can he handle it internally from caucus or those people around him? Can he handle it on a debate stage and cut and parry and thrust with all of the leaders of the opposition parties who will be gunning for him significantly in this election? And, there were MPs who said at the outset of the leadership race, the question on some of their minds was, can he work a wharf? Can he do the thing where he went to the Hamilton steel mill and engage and connect with Canadians? He hasn't had the opportunity to do a lot of that in his life, never mind, in the last few weeks. So it might be a work in progress. Maybe it's a rusty skill, just like his French, that he can figure out. But maybe it ultimately won't matter, because how he portrays himself, and I'm sure will be an onslaught of advertising, the persona that he puts forward there, perhaps that will be enough to convince Canadians that this is the guy they'd like to have leading the country.
Ryan, this week, Carney posted a video of himself at a breakfast meeting with Doug Ford, the newly re-elected Progressive Conservative Premier of Ontario. What does that suggest to you about how Carney is positioning himself?
I think Carney is positioning himself, and I think this has a lot to do, with the success he's had, which has surprised, frankly, even some Liberals, that he's polling so well. But he has portrayed himself as the guy to take on Donald Trump. And that is really the only thing Canadians are casting for right now when they're looking at this election. And so meeting with Doug Ford, the other guy who's been taking on Donald Trump, who's really led that charge, frankly, on a public level, almost more so than the Trudeau government, I think was a move designed to show that, now he's joining the team. Carney is getting geared up for the fight. And I think, as much as Doug Ford is a conservative, he has governed as probably wouldn't like this description, but almost as a red Tory. He's been a very centrist conservative. There's a lot of gap between Doug Ford conservatives and Pierre Poilievre conservatives. And with Mark Carney sort of governing as a centrist liberal, I think there's going to be a lot of areas of agreement between Mark Carney and Doug Ford.
Ryan, do you think, he is from the West, Carney. Do you think he can get any traction in the West?
No, is the short answer.
Yeah. So that's not going to change then.
Yeah, I don't think, maybe a few seats in Edmonton and Calgary that in a best hope become available. But, I think the 4 seats in Alberta that Justin Trudeau won in 2015 are about the best the Liberal Party could hope for there.
Michelle, let's get back to Quebec and how, with Donald Trump, the tariffs, the talk of annexation, how has that changed the political landscape in Quebec? And I'm thinking specifically of the Bloc Québécois, who for years, their whole existence is painting Ottawa out to be the adversary. Suddenly, there is a much bigger adversary in the room, and that is Donald Trump. How has that changed the conversation in Quebec?
Well, Brian Mulroney used to say, "Don't compare me with the Almighty. Compare me to the leader of the opposition." And as long as the ballot box question remains, who do you want to send against Donald Trump? That plays for Mr. Carney and doesn't play well for the Bloc. 6 months ago, the Bloc was thinking of itself as being perhaps the official opposition in the next parliament. This obviously, there's no talk of that anymore, and they know at the Bloc Québécois that they will lose marginal seats. They don't think they will get back. Every member of caucus will get back to Ottawa after this election, precisely because the election is not on a field that is important to the Bloc Québécois. The issues of the Bloc Québécois are not important this year. What is important is the trade war, and that does not play well for the Bloc. This being said, they have well entrenched MPs in many regions, and they will come back with a substantial caucus, but certainly not the size of the caucus they have now, and nobody talks about official opposition anymore.
Michel, Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, has been making ads specifically targeted for Quebec in the last few weeks. How are they playing out in La Belle Province?
People are very curious about Mr. Poilievre because he is, he's a Tory that speaks fluent French, and his wife's from Montreal and all that, and he plays that very, very often. But he is a conservative. He's very conservative by Quebec standards, and stuff that work in the alt-right movement, the Bitcoin, stuff like that, do not connect with Quebecers. That's his main problem. He could make inroads if it was, do you hate Justin Trudeau? But he will not make inroads by using the more extreme right that he has been using, and a lot of people, it's starting it will be said by other parties. They will say it's unfair, but the opposition will say it is sort of a mini Trump.
Well, and that's another question. I mean, Carney can be running on a campaign saying, "I'm not Trudeau." Poilievre can be running on a campaign saying, "I'm not Trump." Yeah. In Poilievre's ads, he said, "Some people think my style is too direct, but he doesn't want to be cute." So, Stephanie, what do you think that Poilievre, what has to be his message right now? He's seen his lead in the polls, almost disappear. What does he have to do to turn things around for the Conservatives?
He, the ballot box question, you're going to see voters going in on voting day and looking down at the ballot box and saying, who do I pick that sends a message to Donald Trump, right? This is a national election we are having. It's a national question. Obviously, Mr. Poilievre has to make it so that people pick him. And one of the ways his team is sending signals that they would like to try and do that is to bring all of this back down to what's normally a ballot box question. Is my life today better off than it was the last time I voted? And if the answer is no, why would you give that person your vote again? And some of that is, the Poilievre argument that one of the reasons Donald Trump sees this country as being so weak is because of the actions of previous governments. And Mr. Poilievre's case to voters is only he can turn it around. The challenge, of course, is, one Conservative put it to me the other day, right now we are wrapped in this patriotic moment in time, and the colors of the Canadian flag are red. And it is difficult for Mr. Poilievre, and perhaps his team will acknowledge he was a bit late off the mark to meet the moment, that Canada First message, that patriotic thing that we've all seized on. Do people believe him? Is he believable in that line of thought? And that's something he's going to have to convince people that, yes, he is believable. Yes, he means it. And no, he is not like Donald Trump.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it seems like this election could be set up as a referendum on leadership and leadership styles, and who is, as we've mentioned before, who's best positioned to take on Trump. So my question, where does this leave the NDP? Ryan, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think it leaves them very stuck. Frankly, everything that we've been seeing over the last 2 years has been narrowing their opportunities. So when the Conservatives were up, there are a lot of conservative NDP splits in this country, places where the Liberals aren't a factor. Now that the Liberals are rising, there's a lot of Liberal NDP splits where the NDP hoped they would do better, where I don't know that they will. So it really leaves that party squeezed. I think there's a sentiment that you don't want to send, you potentially don't want to send a minority government to Ottawa in this moment because you want someone to have a strong mandate to be able to combat Trump. And the NDP are not going to be a majority government suddenly. So I think it's a challenge for them. And I think, staying relevant and trying to convince people that they should be part of the mix is going to be their real challenge this time out.
Stephanie, I've noticed that Carney, at least from what we've heard, has been reportable that the first thing he's going to be doing is travel to London and Paris next week as Canada's Prime Minister. Kind of interesting that the first trip he's making is not to the U.S. and not a meeting with Donald Trump. Why this idea of heading to Europe first?
One of the things that Mr. Carney campaigned on during the leadership race was, a retrenched focus on the Canadian economy, diversifying our markets, strengthening our position globally. So what better way to do that than to go meet right away with the folks who would help with that, right? European leaders, and to sort of forge some kind of global common front against Trump. I think some of that work has already been, underway amongst global leaders. The G7 this week in Quebec is an interesting moment in time for that effort. And it signals Mr. Carney as a statesman in a way that going down to Mar-a-Lago or to the White House to see the president, there's an ickiness factor there. I think there was, are you being a supplicant to the president as opposed to meeting him on even turf? For Mr. Carney to become an emissary, go to Europe, reconnect with some of his old colleagues, in the UK. He knows Macron as well in France, and so it's signaling.
Now, the three of you are very smart when it comes to politics, so I'm going to throw you a little trivia question. Who served the shortest term as Prime Minister in Canadian history?
Charles Tupper.
Ryan, you nailed it. Charles Tupper in 1896. He was chosen to replace Mackenzie Bowell. He lasted 68 days in office. He was then put up as the candidate to lead the Conservatives in that election. They lost that election. So my question to you, well, we'll start with you, Michelle. When do you think this election will be called?
Within 2 weeks.
Wow, that fast.
That fast. I think he has there's nothing for Mr. Carney in waiting longer. And like Stephanie says, it's a good thing that he goes to London and Paris. Then he comes back, and then I think we could have an election called even next week.
Ryan, what do you think?
I think we will be at the polls before next Sunday. I don't think Mr. Carney is interested in going back to Parliament. And that's the timeline. March the 24th is when the House is supposed to resume, and I would bet it doesn't.
And why do you think he needs to move that quickly?
I think there's two things. One, he's got a serious amount of momentum coming out of the leadership race. He likes where the polls are. I think he wants to have this election on his terms rather than the opposition parties. I think he wants, as probably all of the political leaders want, to have this settled so that at least someone has a strong mandate to deal with Donald Trump.
Stephanie, last word to you. I'm just about out of time with 30 seconds here. What's your view of when the election will be?
I agree with Ryan that it'll be called by next Sunday because the House doesn't want to come back. And the other advantage to that, the Conservatives have $41 million in the bank, and they have been spending it willy-nilly to try and define Mr. Carney. The minute the election kicks in, so do election spending limit rules. The Conservatives will be limited on how they can attack and define Mr. Carney. The playing field evens in that respect. And so for the Liberals who, as Ryan said, would like to define him and not have to buy into the opposition definition, time is of the essence.
Well, interesting times, and you've helped us navigate that. Ryan and Stephanie, Michelle Auger, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ryan Tumulty is a political reporter with the Toronto Star. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter with the Globe and Mail's Ottawa Bureau. And Michel C. Auger is a political columnist at La Presse and commentator for Radio-Canada.